Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Then Al-Hafiz said, Babu Hadd al-Sharib wa Bayan al-Muskir, the chapter of the had punishment of the one who drinks intoxicants and the meaning of what a muskir is, or that which intoxicates. First of all, let us explain what a muskir is, or that which intoxicates. The word khamr comes from khammara yukhammiru, which means to cover. And so a woman wears a khimar. This covers the head and neck area. So khamr we define in the Sharia as a substance which covers your intellect. This is what it does. This is intoxication. It covers your intellect by way of pleasure. And we say by way of pleasure because this is what khamr is, and so it does not include anesthetics. So if you're in a hospital, for example, and you need anesthetics, and this is going to take away your intellect, certainly, it will knock you out unconscious, is this then khamr? The answer is no, because even though it does cover your intellect, for sure, it is not by way of pleasure. What is the ruling on al-khamr? Well, it is haram with the Quran, Sunnah and the Ijma'. As for the Quran, then we have certain ayat which actually indicate that khamr is halal. And indeed, this was the case at the beginning of Islam. Khamr was halal and gradually it was made haram. The ayah which indicates that it is halal, in Surah An-Nahl, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَمِن ثَمَرَاتِ النَّخِيلِ وَالْأَعْنَابِ تَتَّخِذُونَ مِنْهُ سَكَرًا وَرِزْقًا حَسَنًا إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. And from the fruits of the date trees and the grapes, you take from it sakaran, which is intoxicants, and a goodly provision. Verily in that is a sign for those who use their intellect. So this ayah is telling you about the good provision that Allah Jalla wa Ala has provided, and from this is the sakar, which is the intoxicants. But then Allah Jalla wa Ala gradually made it haram. He says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. They ask you about the khamr, intoxicants, and gambling. Say, there is in them a great sin, but also benefits for people, but the sin is bigger than the benefit. So the ayah is not explicit in saying that it is haram, but it is hinting towards that. Because if something whose harms are greater than the benefit, then this is the type of thing which the Sharia makes haram. The Sharia only makes halal that whose benefits is greater than the harm. And likewise, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى حَتَّى تَعْلَمُوا مَا تَقُولُونَ. O you who believe, don't approach the prayer when you are intoxicated, until you know what you are saying. So again, this would discourage drinking the intoxicant, because if you're praying 5 times a day, then this means that you really do have to let go of the khamr. And finally, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, Allah Jalla wa Ala explicitly states that it is haram. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون. O you who believe, khamr and gambling and sacrificing on the stone altar to the false gods and seeking a decision by way of throwing arrows to determine your luck, all of this is the impurity or evil of the work of shaitan. So avoid it that you may be successful. Then Allah explains to us why gambling and khamr are haram. In the next ayah he says, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَن يُوقِعَ بَيْنَكُمُ الْعَدَاوَةَ وَالْبَغْضَاءَ فِي الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ وَيَصُدَّكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَعَنِ الصَّلَاةِ فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. Shaitan only wants to excite enmity and hatred between you with intoxicants and gambling. And secondly, he wants to hinder you from the remembrance of Allah and from the salah. So, after having known this, will you then not abstain? So we find a clear order is given to abstain, or to avoid these actions. So we find it's not just khamr and maisir, rather any activity which diverts you from the remembrance of Allah and from salah, then it takes the same ruling as the khamr, because it's producing the same effects. So you could have other people involved with games and music and other types of distraction, which distracts them from the salah and from the remembrance of Allah, so it takes the same ruling. It is haram. And khamr particularly is something which can lead to many other evils, because when you lose your intellect, then everything becomes permissible. You simply lose your inhibitions and you lose your modesty, and if you don't feel shy, then you do as you wish. The Prophet ﷺ made this clear when he said, الخمر أم الخبائث فمن شربها لم تقبل له صلاة 40 يوما فإن مات وهي في بطنه مات ميتة جاهلية. The khamr is the mother or the root of all types of evil actions, and whoever drinks it, then 40 days of his prayer would not be accepted, meaning he would not be rewarded for 40 days worth of prayer. But he still has to pray them, of course. And if he was to die and this khamr is in his belly, he would die the death of jahiliyyah. Because you could only expect a person from the jahiliyyah, which is a person from the days of foolishness, to die whilst the khamr is in his belly. It is not from the traits of a proper Muslim. This hadith in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad is authentic. So the point is that the khamr has detrimental effects on your iman, on your actions that you will perform in terms of righteousness and evil, but also physical health. All you need to do is to take a look at a picture of a liver which has been affected by alcohol, and that would speak more than 1,000 words. But despite it being undeniably haram, the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih al-Bukhari told us that there will be a group of my ummah who would seek to make lawful khamr and zina and wearing of silk and musical instruments. So all of these actions are definitely haram, and there will be a group of this ummah seeking to make it lawful. So either they will practice this as if it was lawful, or they will seek to change the ruling entirely. As for all types of khamr, then this is muskir. All types of intoxicants, it intoxicates, and every muskir is haram. Note here that Al-Hafidh says the had punishment of the one who drinks khamr. And so upon this then, we have to discuss, is it a had punishment or is it a ta'zir? Many scholars say it is a had punishment, others say it is a ta'zir, and the weightier opinion is that it is not a had punishment, it is a ta'zir, because this is what the evidence indicates too. During the time of the Prophet and Abu Bakr, when they were in charge, the punishment was 40 lashes. During the time of Umar radiallahu anh, people began to drink khamr a bit more abundantly, and so he decided to up the punishment. The point is, if it's a had punishment, then you're not allowed to change it. And when he consulted the Sahaba, Abdurrahman ibn Auf said that the minimum had punishment is 80 lashes. He's referring to the qadhaf, of course. So he says that we should make it into 80 lashes, which is the minimum of the had punishment. So if the had was 40 lashes, then you're not allowed to increase it. In the same way, for example, if somebody commits a zina, and the had is 100 lashes, you're not allowed to increase it up to 150 lashes. It needs to remain what it is. Okay, is it permissible to drink an intoxicant if you're dying out of thirst? Many people might say yes, it's a case of necessity, is it not? But we need to understand that when we consume something which is haram, we need to be pretty sure that it's going to remove our necessity. So in this case, if we're dying out of thirst, we need to be quite sure that it will remove our thirst and we will not die. And we also take the minimum amount which is necessary to remove the necessity. Well, the minimum amount we can take, so that condition is not a problem. The problem is with the first condition, will it remove our death scenario? If we take khamr to be alcohol in our scenario, then alcohol is something which will dehydrate you. So you'll end up dying quicker. So in a case like this, it would not be permissible to take alcohol, because alcohol has a dehydrating effect. In a necessity, it can be permissible to drink alcohol if, let's say, you have something stuck in your throat and you're dying because you're going to choke. So to remove that which is trapped in your throat, then you can drink the alcohol. Because now in this scenario it is different. We can be quite sure that the alcohol will remove our necessity. So notice the difference then. So as for the punishment, we say that if a Muslim drinks it whilst he is baligh, aqil, and he is alim, so he knows that khamr is haram, and he also is mukhtar, so he chooses to do it as opposed to being forced to do it, then upon him is the punishment for the khamr, which at minimum is going to be 40 lashes. Notice, if a kafir in an Islamic state drinks khamr, then he would not receive the punishment, even though the Islamic law does apply to him. And this is because in his deen, the khamr is halal. So as long as he drinks it in his own household and not publicly, then we would have to not take notice of what he's doing. The Hanbali madhab says that it is 80 lashes in accordance with what Umar radiallahu anh decided, and they said that for a servant it will be half the amount of punishment, which is 40 lashes. And they're going by the ruling that the had punishment applied to a servant is half that of a free person. But the problem is there doesn't seem to be any evidence for this, and we cannot make an analogy between this and the zina. But if we say that it's a ta'zir punishment, then the issue is flexible. We don't have to specify any one particular number. Okay, let's take a look at these ahadith. Number 1078. It is the statement of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anh. We'll go into the translation. He says that a man was brought to the Prophet. He had drunk khamr, and so this man was whipped with branches about 40 lashes. And Anas says that this is what Abu Bakr did, but during the time of the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh, he sought the advice of the people as to what the punishment for drinking the khamr should be, and Abdurrahman bin Auf said, أَخَفُّ الْحُدُودِ ثَمَانُونَ, that the lightest of the had punishments is 80 lashes. And so, because of this, Umar ibn al-Khattab ordered that the one who drinks the khamr be whipped 80 lashes. Muttafaqun alayh. And in a version of Muslim from Ali radiallahu anh, he says that the Prophet and Abu Bakr, they whipped the drinker of khamr 40 lashes, but Umar whipped them 80 lashes. And he says, all of this is sunnah, but this is more beloved to me, meaning the 80 lashes. And in the hadith as well, a man testified against another man that he saw the other man vomiting out khamr. And to that, Uthman radiallahu anh replied that he would not have vomited out khamr unless he had drunk it. And this is part of the story where a man called Al-Walid ibn Uqba, he had drunk khamr and he vomited it out. And we had a total of 3 witnesses who testified that he did in fact vomit out khamr, and so Uthman radiallahu anh applied the punishment on him. So with khamr, just as with zina, they are both major sins, and we find that it is happening during the best of generations, during the time of the Prophet, and of Abu Bakr, and of Umar, and of Uthman. It happened in the best of generations. So what is your opinion, O listener, akramakallah, about this generation? Well over 1400 years after the best generation. These types of major sins are going to be occurring amongst Muslims far more frequently. Amongst kuffar they have always been occurring, so there's no difference there. But what we are concerned with is the Muslim nation. So it should not come as a surprise that many Muslims are drinking alcohol, many Muslims are committing zina, they are committing adultery, and all types of major sins that you can think of. It is happening more than ever in the Muslim Ummah. This narration of Umar seeking the consultation of others, it proves that the lashing for the one who drinks the khamr, or the sharib, as we say in Arabic, this is the drinker, meaning to say the one who drinks khamr. So this is the sharib. His punishment is not a had punishment, because if it was a had punishment, then Umar radiallahu anh would not have consulted the people. And likewise, Abdurrahman ibn Auf said that the least of the had punishments is 80 lashes. But if the khamr was the least had punishment, then he would have said that the least is 40 lashes. We take from this narration that when you're whipping somebody, then a branch can be used. It has to be something which will cause pain, but not cause any unnecessary injury like breaking of the bone or some sort of deep bleeding. We also take the vital lesson that even the ruler should consult with people of knowledge and good opinion and judgment when there is a need, just like Umar radiallahu anh did so here, even though he himself was incredibly knowledgeable. But when you do consult with other people, then you need to make sure that they have knowledge, they are wise, and that they would love for you what they love for themselves. And you need to note that just because somebody is a Muslim does not necessitate that he loves for you what he loves for himself. So this is an area in which you have to tread carefully. One big issue about khamr is that, is it najis? Most scholars say it is najis. So it's of the same category as, let's say, urine and feces of a human. But it appears the weightier opinion is that it is not najis, and that when Allah Jalla wa Ala describes it as being a rijs, as being an impurity of the amal al-shaytan, the work of shaytan, then this is spiritual impurity, because the same thing he says about gambling. And we know gambling cannot be physically impure, but it is, however, spiritually impure. In the same way, mushrikeen are spiritually impure, but not physically impure. And also, we have occasions where the Muslims, when khamr was made haram, after it was halal, they poured it in the streets of Al-Madinah. But if it was najis, then you're not allowed to pour al-najasa in the streets where it will affect the people. However, this was deemed to be okay. Therefore, khamr, if it's on your clothing, you are allowed to pray. And you are not required to remove it as you would be required if you had urine on your clothes. If it is tahir, then we ask the question, is it permissible to be used in perfumes? Some may say, no, it is not permissible because Allah Jalla wa Ala clearly gives the command, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. So avoid it that you may be successful. And avoiding it is in terms of drinking and as well in terms of putting it on as perfume. However, we could argue back and say that when Allah Jalla wa Ala says avoid it, it means avoid it in a way in which it is haram. So it is haram to consume it because it will intoxicate you, and it sows enmity between you, and it diverts you from the remembrance of Allah and from the salah. So this is why you need to avoid it. But putting it on as a perfume would not cause these harmful effects. Thus putting it on as perfume would be okay. And likewise, before giving injections, they would clean the injection area with some sort of khamr, so this is okay as well. And we take that the punishment for the sharib is that you can give 40 whips or you can give 80 whips as well. If we go by the correct opinion, that is a ta'zir, then you can give a minimum of 40 and anything in between 40 and 80. You might even increase it if you feel that this would be more beneficial. If somebody witnesses against another that he vomited out the khamr, then this does serve as proof, as we find with the narration of Uthman radiallahu anhu, where he took this as evidence. So if you have two witnesses who say that he vomited out khamr, then this will take the same ruling as two witnesses saying that they saw him drink khamr, because you cannot vomit it out unless you had drunk it in the first place. This is similar to if a woman becomes pregnant due to zina. She could not have been pregnant unless she committed the zina. And so therefore, the correct opinion is the had punishment can be established on such a woman. And we discussed this issue before. And we said that as long as she does not claim any shubuha, then the had punishment is established. So for example, as long as she doesn't claim that perhaps she was raped. And if this is a valid shubuha, we have every reason to believe that yes, she could have been raped, then we would not establish it. Otherwise, if it's not a valid shubha, then we would establish. And it's the same thing here. A man may claim that he drank something and he did not know it was alcoholic, or maybe he was forced to drink it for whatever reason. This is certainly possible. So if he claims this shubha, we would need to look into it. We do not just take his word for it. He could be trying to escape the had punishment. But we look into the matter and then decide. So in other words, an investigation is required. Hadith 1079 from Muawiyah radiallahu anh, that the Prophet ﷺ said about the one who drinks the khamr, إِذَا شَرِبَ فَاجْلِدُوهُ ثُمَّ إِذَا شَرِبَ فَاجْلِدُوهُ ثُمَّ إِذَا شَرِبَ الثَّالِثَةَ فَاجْلِدُوهُ ثُمَّ إِذَا شَرِبَ الرَّابِعَةَ فَاضْرِبُوا عُنُقَهُ. أخرجه أحمد وهذا لفظه والأربعة، وذكر الترمذي ما يدل على أنه منسوخ، وأخرج ذلك أبو داود صريحا عن الزهري. If he drinks the khamr, then whip him. Then if he drinks it again, whip him. And then if he drinks it the third time, then whip him. And if he drinks it the fourth time, then strike his neck. This hadith is sahih. This narration in the beginning is okay. It talks about whipping this person. But in the end, it says if he drinks it a fourth time, then strike his neck. And this is obviously the death sentence. You'll remember in the chapter of the stealing, there was a narration which talked about killing the one who steals. And that narration was da'if. And we said that it goes against the general principles which is that the had punishment of stealing is well known, and you're not allowed to increase on that had punishment. And also this idea that the Prophet telling the people to kill him without actually investigating the affair, and also telling the people to kill him when he only stole. All of this does not make immense amount of sense. But in this narration here, again we find the Prophet orders that if this person does not refrain from drinking the khamr or consuming khamr and intoxicating himself, then you would kill him. So some scholars have said that this ruling is mansukh, it is abrogated, and this is the opinion of a Shafi'i as is stated here in the book. However, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says that if the people do not refrain from drinking the khamr, even after the punishment of the whipping is applied, then, if necessary, you would kill them. So the death sentence can apply then. And this would further suggest that the punishment of the sharib is not a had punishment, because a had punishment is fixed, you cannot decrease nor increase. Whereas with a ta'zir, you can go up to the death sentence, if need be. And perhaps this would be a good way to reconcile this situation. We can say that normally you would whip them, but if this does not work and the khamr becomes widespread, then if the death sentence is going to stop the people from drinking, then so be it. And this would be down to the ijtihad of the imam. And this ruling would not be a problem if we go by the idea or the opinion that the punishment for the sharib is not a had punishment, it is a ta'zir. Because with a ta'zir now, we can be flexible. We can increase, we can decrease in accordance with the ijtihad of the imam. This hadith would be more of a problem if we go by the opinion that the punishment for the sharib is a had punishment. Because now, how can you increase this had punishment to the death sentence? And so, if the people keep drinking the khamr and intoxicating themselves, then perhaps the imam feels that because of this, people are losing their intellect and they are causing mischief on the earth. And maybe all this drunken behavior is leading to fights and killing and murder and general mischief on the earth, because this is what khamr does, of course. It incites enmity and it leads to a lot of mischief. Remember the hadith that the khamr is the ummul khaba'ith, is the mother of all the impure actions. So perhaps the beating is not putting people off, and they are drinking, they're getting drunk, they are causing mischief in the land. So in a case like this, if the imam feels that the death sentence would deter people and would knock some sense into them and would make them sober, so as to speak, then so be it. The madhab of the Zahiriyah is even stricter than what we have just said. They simply say, as the hadith says, if he drinks for the fourth time, he is to be killed. Simple. And majority of the scholars say that this idea of killing the person the fourth time is abrogated. As for the scholars who say that this hadith is abrogated, they bring their evidence. For example, in the Sahih, we have the narration of a man who always would drink khamr and he would be whipped for it. And this would happen many times, and so the people began to curse him. And the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تلعنه فإنه يحب الله ورسوله. Do not curse him, because he loves Allah and His Messenger. So this man was whipped many times, and he still did not suffer the death sentence. There is also another narration in Sunan Abi Dawud, where the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said that if he drinks, then whip him, then if he drinks for the third or fourth time, then kill him. And then a man was brought to the Prophet because he drank the khamr and he was whipped, and he was brought 4 times, and on the 4th time he was not killed, he was whipped, and the killing was abrogated. And this was a rukhsa, or a lightening of the load for the one who drinks the khamr. So they say, because of this narration, initially the 4th time would incur the death penalty, but then the load was lightened. However, this narration is mursal, hence it cannot be taken as evidence in and of itself. They also give the evidence from the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said that the blood of a Muslim should not be spilt except for 3 causes: a life for a life, or an adulterer, or a murtad. And the one who regularly drinks the khamr does not fall under any of these categories. However, the rule of usul al-fiqh tells us when we have a nafi and a muthbit, we take the muthbit because it gives us an increase in knowledge. So even though this hadith of the 3 categories keeps quiet about the regular drinker of the khamr, this other hadith, which we are discussing now, gives us an increase in knowledge. So we should take that which gives us an increase in knowledge, and this is a basic rule in Usul al-Fiqh. But the opinion of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah on this issue is a decent opinion, as we have mentioned. Hadith 1080. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا ضرب أحدكم فليتق الوجه متفق عليه. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, when one of you strikes, then let him avoid the face. متفق عليه. Hadith 1081. وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تقام الحدود في المساجد رواه الترمذي والحاكم. From Ibn Abbas, the Prophet said that the had punishments are not to be established in the masajid. The hadith is Hasan. So the first narration talks about striking the face. This is in terms of when somebody disciplines another. So a parent or a teacher disciplining the pupil or the son or daughter, then you're allowed to hit them, but you must avoid the face. So when anyone in authority disciplines his flock, then they must avoid the face. In case of qisas, we can argue that it is different, because the reward of an evil is an evil similar to it. So if somebody strikes your face, as a qisas you can strike his face back. Even though striking the face in and of itself is wrong, but with a qisas it becomes okay, because here we have evidence. Notice here that the had punishment is a mercy to the one on the receiving end. So the one who is carrying out the had punishment should not intend thereby to cause as much suffering or to have hatred in the heart towards the one receiving the punishment. Rather, as Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says, the one carrying out the had punishment needs to have a similar intention as the father does towards his child when he hits the child for ta'deeb, or to discipline the child. Now the father doesn't want to humiliate the child or to cause suffering towards his own child. Rather, he does hit him in order to make the child better in terms of his character and behavior, and to show the child what he has done is wrong and he must never repeat it. Or similarly, how a doctor may prescribe a bitter medicine to the patient. Certainly the patient is struggling dealing with this medicine, and the doctor knows this, but it must be done because it is essentially for the betterment of the patient. And had punishments are exactly like this medicine. Sure, they are not enjoyable to the one who is receiving them, but they are for his betterment. It is saving him from the punishment in the hereafter. And so this is the intention of the one carrying out the had punishment. It is for the betterment of the one who is receiving it, not merely to cause pain for self-gratification. This is absolutely not the intention. So if you bear this in mind, then it makes sense that you avoid the face when you're striking the person. There is no benefit in striking the face. Rather, you strike the other parts of the body. And the face part of the body is where the honor lies. It is how you recognize different people. And so this gives the face some special status over the other parts of the body. It is the most honorable part of the body. And we find in the second narration that the had is not established in the masajid. This is understandable. Masajid are places of tranquility, of the dhikr of Allah, of the salah, of recitation of the Quran, of study circles. These are all calm and tranquil activities. It is not normally the place for violent actions, lots of physical actions, and places of noise. And so the had punishment, if it is being established, can lead to noise, and it is not fitting to be done in a place which should be tranquil and quiet. Thus we find it is not allowed to establish the had punishment in the masjid. However, what if it is established? Do we say, no, we have to re-establish it outside the masjid? The answer is no. This would be dhulm upon the one receiving it. Rather, we say that the had punishment, if established in the masjid, would suffice. However, the people have done wrong in establishing the had punishment in the masjid. Hadith number 1082. وعن أنس رضي الله عنه قال لقد أنزل الله تحريم الخمر وما بالمدينة شراب يشرب إلا من تمر أخرجه مسلم. Anas says that Allah sent down the tahrim of the khamr, so he made it haram, and in Al-Madinah the only khamr which was drunk was made through the tamr, dried dates. Muslim reported it. 1083. وعن عمر رضي الله عنه قال نزل تحريم الخمر وهي من خمسة من العنب والتمر والعسل والحنطة والشعير والخمر ما خامر العقل متفق عليه. Umar says the tahrim of khamr was sent down, and it was made with 5 things: grapes, dried dates, honey, wheat, and barley. And khamr is that which covers the intellect. Muttafaqun alayh. We find in these 2 narrations that khamr is made haram, so it was halal. And when it was halal, it was from the tayyibat, from the good things which was allowed to be consumed. When it was made haram, it became khabith. So it just goes to show that what is tayyib and what is khabith is down to Allah Jalla wa Ala alone. Hadith 1084. وعن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: كل مسكر خمر وكل مسكر حرام. أخرجه مسلم. From Ibn Umar, the Prophet said, every intoxicant is khamr and every intoxicant is haram. Muskir is that which clouds the intellect, and khamr comes from the verb to cover, because when your intellect is clouded, it is covered. So you can see the link there. Hadith 1085. وعن جابر رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: ما أسكر كثيره فقليله حرام. أخرجه أحمد والأربعة وصححه ابن حبان. From Jabir, the Prophet said, if a substance in large quantity would cause intoxication, then consuming a small amount of it is haram. This hadith is Hasan. So these are 4 simple narrations here. The first 2 have a common thread. We simply take from it that khamr can be made out of any substance. It is not restricted to any one particular substance. So as long as you've consumed any substance by drink or otherwise which would intoxicate you, then it is haram, it is khamr, and you are to be given the punishment. In Al-Madinah, khamr was made from tamar, and Umar says there, in the second narration, it can be made from 5 substances: grapes, dried dates, honey, wheat, and barley. In fact, it doesn't even have to be these 5 substances only. It could be any substance which intoxicates, simple as that. Some scholars from Kufa, they have said that any intoxicant which is made from other than anab is not haram to be consumed, and you're not given the had punishment. But if you intoxicate yourself with anything, then you are given the had punishment. But as for if you consume the intoxicant made from anab, then even if you do not intoxicate yourself, then you are given the had punishment. But the statement of Umar radiallahu anh refutes all of this. He simply says that khamr is what covers the intellect. Al-khamr ma khamar al-aql. So it does not matter which substance this khamr is made from. As long as it has intoxicating qualities, it is haram to consume, and you are given the had punishment, even if you do not intoxicate yourself. With regards to the small amount of intoxicant, then you can find this amount in medicines. Now that does not mean that the medicine is haram to be taken, because sometimes these small amounts of alcohol could be used as a preservative, and you cannot normally detect the smell or the taste of this alcohol because it is in such a small quantity. And so even if you were to drink a large quantity of this medicine, you would still not be intoxicated because the alcohol content is so negligible. So such medicines are halal to be taken. The alcohol content may be something like 1% or even less. This will not harm, even in large quantities. Hadith 1086. وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال: كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ينبذ له الزبيب في السقاء فيشربه يومه والغد وبعد الغد، فإذا كان مساء الثالثة شربه وسقاه، فإن فضل شيء أحراقه. أخرجه Muslim. From Ibn Abbas, he says that nabidh would be made for the Prophet, made from raisins in a container, and he would drink it the first day, and then the second day, and then the third day. Then when it was the evening of that third day, he would drink it and he would give others to drink, and if there was anything remaining after that, he would spill it. Muslim reported it. Nabidh is simply water which is mixed with raisins or grapes or dates in order to make it sweet. And so this would be considered a type of luxury drink which people would enjoy. The problem is, however, if you leave it like that in hot countries, it would turn into an intoxicant. This is why we find the Prophet would drink it and give it to drink in the first 3 days, then at the end of the third day, in the evening, he would drink it, and if anything remained, he would spill it because it is about to be turned into an intoxicant. However, nowadays we have fridges, and so you could store these drinks in a cool place and they would not turn into an intoxicant. So this limit of the 3 days is not intended in and of itself. Rather, the way to understand it is that the drink must be prevented from becoming an intoxicant. So this could happen within 3 days, it could happen after 3 days. In the narration prior to this, we find whatever intoxicates in large quantities, then its small quantity is also haram. And this is because a smaller quantity leads to a larger quantity, and what leads to haram does also become haram. But as for if a drink, let's say, contains some khamr, but it is of such a small quantity that if you were to drink this drink in a large quantity, you would not be intoxicated, then this type of drink is halal to be drunk. And upon this we can say that some medicines which do contain some alcohol, if they are consumed in large quantities and they do not cause intoxication, then that sort of medicine is halal to be taken, because the alcohol there serves as a preservative. We learned from the hadith that every muskir is khamr. So everything which intoxicates is khamr and every muskir is haram. Does this mean that everything which is not a muskir is halal? The answer is no. We cannot logically come to that conclusion. So surely every muskir, every intoxicant is haram, but everything which does not intoxicate does not mean that it is halal, because eating pork does not intoxicate, but it is still haram. So every intoxicant is haram, but everything which is haram is not always intoxicating. From this last narration which we have mentioned, can we take that it is permissible to consume the enjoyable things in life? So this nabidh would be an enjoyable drink. Well, the answer is yes, it is in fact something praiseworthy to consume something which is enjoyable, because if this is a ni'mah which Allah Jalla wa Ala has granted you, then you should accept it. So just like it is sunnah to accept gifts from others and repay them the gift, then it is also likewise something praiseworthy to accept the gift from Allah Jalla wa Ala. And we took the hadith, and when Allah bestows His ni'mah upon His servant, He likes its effects, meaning the effects of the ni'mah, to be seen. And Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah says that if somebody refrains from the tayyibat, from the good things which Allah has made halal, without a valid shari'i reason, then this refraining of his is in fact madhmoom, or blameworthy. Hadith number 1087. وعن أم سلمة رضي الله عنها عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن الله لم يجعل شفاءكم فيما حرم عليكم أخرجه البيهقي وصححه ابن حبان. From Salama, the Prophet said, Allah has not made your cure in that which He has made haram for you. Hadith 1088. وعن وائل الحضرمي أن طارق بن السويد رضي الله عنهما سأل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الخمر يصنعها للدواء فقال إنها ليست بدواء ولكنها داء. أخرجه مسلم وأبو داود وغيرهما. From Wa'il al-Hadrami, that Tariq ibn Suwaid asked the Prophet about khamr which they would use as medicine, and the Prophet said that it is not medicine, rather it is a disease. Muslim reported it, as well as Abu Dawud. So both of these two last ahadith in this chapter have a common thread running through them, that haram items are not to be used as medication, and specifically we're talking about khamr. That which is haram is not used as medication because it is not something which is overall beneficial for you. If it was overall beneficial, then it would not be haram in the very first place, because Allah Jalla wa Ala only makes haram that whose harms are greater than the benefit. So what we understand from the hadith is that if in the haram items there is no cure for you, then the only cure can come from the halal items. And the Prophet ﷺ said, تداووا عباد الله فإن الله لم يضع داء إلا وضع له دواء غير داء واحد الهرم. Take medication, O slaves of Allah, because Allah has put for every disease a healing, except for one disease, senility. And this hadith is authentic. Likewise in the Sahih, the Prophet ﷺ said, الشفاء في ثلاثة شربة عسل أو شرطة محجم أو كية النار وأنا أنهى أمتي عن الكي. He says healing is in three things: the incision of the mihjam, which is used for the hijama, drinking honey, and cauterization, but I forbid my ummah from cauterizing. So he mentions three remedies here. Likewise, on the night in which the Prophet was taken up, every angel which he passed by ordered the Prophet to order his ummah with hijama. Likewise, he spoke about al-habbatu sawda. It is a cure from every disease except death. He talks about the Indian aloes wood. When he passed by some women who were holding up the uvula of their children because it was swollen, he said to them, على ما تدغرن أولادكن بهذا العلاق عليكن بهذا العود الهندي فإن فيه 7 أشفية يستعط به من العذرة ويلد به من ذات الجنب. Why are you putting your fingers in the throat of your children holding up their uvula like this? You should use the al-oud al-hindi, the Indian aloes wood, because it has 7 remedies, and from it you sniff it if you have a swollen uvula, and also you take it as droplets in the side of your mouth to heal you from pleurisy. So these are examples of halal items being used as medication. Question: what if you have a case of necessity in which you need to use something haram for medication?
Well, we say in a case like this to use a medication which is definitely haram, let's say something like an intoxicant. Certain conditions would have to be met for it to be permissible. Number one, that there is no alternative, which is halal. Note that sometimes not taking medication may be an alternative because you could just heal naturally. But let us suppose you cannot heal naturally and it is a dire necessity where you absolutely must take medication and there is literally no halal alternative. So this is a condition. The second condition is that it needs to actually work. This must be proven to be the case medically, that this medicine actually works and it does not lead to a greater harm than benefit, whereby the medicine is actually worse than the disease. And the third condition is that you only use this haram medication to the minimum required level and no more, just like eating pork to save your life. So these are 3 conditions which must be respected. So that is to say, there is no alternative, that this medication actually produces a healing effect, and that you must take it to the minimum amount. In fact, let's just add a 4th condition, which ought to be obvious, but we'll add it anyway, which is that this is a case of darura. You must take the medication. In other words, you cannot afford not to take it. As for the second condition, that the medicine must be proven to do the job, normally, when it comes to medicines in the pharmacy, they are all evidence-based. So that should not be a problem. What you need to be highly skeptical about are the homeopathic medications, because there is no reliable evidence that these actually produce a healing effect. Sure, there are some dodgy websites which may claim otherwise, but these types of medications do not stand up to scrutiny when scientifically tested. So homeopathic medicines are fine, but not the haram types. If you have to take a haram type of medicine, such as narcotics or morphines, which are highly addictive drugs, then they need to be evidence-based from the pharmacy, with all the other conditions met. So note that.
What about taking remedy from something which is najis? So for example, the fat or the grease taken from the pig. Now the shahm or the fat of the pig is najis, but if you have to put it on yourself as ointment, then is this haram to do? Because you're not consuming the pig now. Even though it is najis, it is allowed to be used as medication. Because what is haram is to consume the pig. But if you use it as an ointment, you're not consuming it. And so therefore it is halal only when the time of salah comes, you need to take it off. So if you have to put something najis on yourself as ointment, then this is not haram, if it is done for a genuine benefit. And so likewise with poison, if you have to use poison as ointment on some sort of injury, now of course consuming poison will kill you and therefore it is haram to do so.
But using it as ointment does not have the same lethal effect. and is therefore halal. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. Explain what khamr is linguistically and shar'an, and then state its punishment. Question number 2. Discuss whether a regular drinker of khamr can be executed or not. Discuss both sides of the argument. Question number 3. State the conditions for a haram medicine to be used, and also state whether something najis can be used as an ointment, giving justification.